My name is Sierra Thompson, and I was 34 the day my own sister looked me in the eye and told me to find somewhere else to die. 3 days after our parents' funeral, when the smell of lilies still clung to my black dress and my legs still ached from standing graveside, Victoria stood in the doorway of the only home I had left, surrounded by moving boxes and her husband, and delivered that sentence without a single tear, like she was reading off a to-do list. I was still walking with a cane from the car accident that almost killed me 2 years earlier, still waking up some mornings with my back locked in pain. But to her, I was already dead weight, something to be cleared out before the sympathy cards even stopped arriving. Our parents had just been lowered into the ground. The flowers on their graves were still upright and bright. And my older sister, my own blood, was throwing me out of the house where I had spent the last 2 years recovering, healing, and caring for the same parents she could barely bother to visit unless there was a holiday photo op. She genuinely believed I had nothing, that I was useless, that I'd just quietly disappear and make room for her plans. She was wrong. Before getting to what happened at the lawyer's office 3 days later, the part where my parents spoke louder in death than they ever could in life, hit like and subscribe only if you truly enjoy this kind of long, emotional, Mama June-style story time, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. To really understand how deeply her words cut and why the ending of this story feels like justice, you need to see what my life looked like before everything went sideways and what I had already survived by the time my sister decided I didn't deserve a home. 2 years before my parents died, I was a working landscape architect with a small but thriving firm in Hartford, spending my days sketching garden plans at coffee shops and my evenings walking clients' properties with a measuring tape and a head full of ideas. I designed layered, story-like gardens for wealthy clients, restored old stone terraces on historic estates, and had just landed a contract with the city's Botanical Society to redesign one of their public spaces. My calendar was full, my email was a mess, my body was healthy from climbing around job sites, and for once in my life, the future felt like it made sense. Then, a drunk driver ran a red light on a rainy Tuesday night and hit my car hard enough that emergency workers had to cut me out of the wreck. I don't remember the impact. I remember blue lights, a taste of blood in my mouth, and then waking up in a hospital bed with metal rods in my spine, and doctors gently explaining that I might never walk again. The surgery took 11 hours, and the recovery, they said, would take years. My cute little walk-up apartment suddenly became a trap. My office had deadlines I could no longer manage, and my savings had hard limits that my medical bills didn't respect at all. When my parents offered their downstairs guest room in the house where I grew up, I swallowed my pride and said yes. I moved back into the bedroom that still had my dusty high school track trophies on the shelf, sleeping under the same ceiling I used to stare at as a teenager when I was dreaming about getting out. For 18 months, I lived in a wheelchair and learned a brand new kind of humility: how to navigate narrow door frames, how to ask for help in the bathroom, how to sit at the bottom of the stairs and wait for someone to bring me things from the second floor I couldn't reach. My mother read to me on bad days, old mystery novels and gardening books, just to distract me from the fire in my spine. My father built a ramp on the back porch so I could roll out into the garden and feel the sun on my face. They adjusted the kitchen so I could reach mugs and plates, moved rugs so my wheels wouldn't catch, and carried my chair over the one stubborn doorstep that never wanted to cooperate. Victoria, meanwhile, called once a month, sometimes less. When she did, it was usually on speakerphone from her car between errands, and if I happened to answer instead of Mom, her response was always the same. "Oh, you're still there. Put Mom on." Still there, like I was mold on the grout. She never asked how physical therapy was going, never asked about my pain levels, never once offered to help with bills or care. The few times I tried to explain what my days looked like, how hard it was to sleep, how scary it was to stand up even for a few seconds, she changed the subject back to her kids' piano recitals and Derek's promotion. What Victoria never asked and never knew was that 4 months before our parents died, I had finally fought my way from a wheelchair to a walker to a cane, inch by inch, scream by scream. First, 5 shaky steps with the therapist beside me, then 10, then a slow shuffle down the hallway on my own. I was healing, I was getting stronger. But in my sister's mind, I would always be the broken one, the burden, the problem she could pretend lives somewhere in the background of her perfect life. The last Christmas before everything fell apart, Victoria arrived with her perfect family like a storm front in designer shoes. Derek walked in wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly medical bills. Their kids, Emma and Jack, dropped their suitcases in the hall and sprinted through the house like it was their private playground. And Victoria immediately began directing everyone like a stage manager. She moved my mother's centerpiece 3 inches to the left, swapped out the plates she thought were too dated, and issued sharp little corrections about oven temperatures and napkin folds, all under the banner of helping. I had spent 3 days preparing her children's favorite foods: homemade mac and cheese for Jack, chocolate chip pancakes for Emma, standing at the counter with my cane propped against the stove, timing my breaks because my back could only handle 20 minutes at a stretch. I didn't have to cook. My parents would have understood if I stayed in bed. But I wanted to contribute. I wanted to prove, mostly to myself, that I was still useful. On Christmas morning, as always, my father set up the tripod in the living room for our annual family photo. My mother fussed over the tree, the kids argued over who got to stand in front, Derek checked his hair in the reflection of the TV. I stood off to the side with my cane, ready to ease myself into place at the edge of the group. Victoria looked at me, smiled in that tight way that never reaches her eyes, and said, "Sierra, maybe you should sit this one out. We want a nice picture for the Christmas card." The room went quiet so fast it felt like someone had sucked out all the air. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father stared a little too hard at the camera. I managed, "I can stand, it's fine." And she shrugged. "It's just the wheelchair doesn't really fit the aesthetic, you know." I wasn't even in the wheelchair anymore. I was standing, with effort, but standing, holding my cane like a lifeline. Arguing with Victoria never made things better. It just gave her more material to twist. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded and walked into the kitchen as quietly as I could. Through the window over the sink, I watched my own family line up and smile while the camera clicked once, twice, 3 times. I didn't know until much later that my father watched that moment from the corner of the room, and that very next morning he went down to our longtime estate a lawyer's office and quietly changed his will. All I knew at the time was the hollow, familiar ache of being treated like an extra in a story I thought I was part of, and the heavier ache of realizing that maybe this was just who my sister had become. In March, my parents boarded a small chartered plane to California to attend an old college friend's wedding. It was supposed to be a quick trip, clear skies, 6 passengers, back in 3 days. Instead, the plane went down somewhere over Nevada. Officials used soft words like mechanical failure and quick, as if that made the hole in my chest feel any smaller. I was in the garden pruning the roses my mother planted 15 years earlier when the call came. 1 minute I was snipping dead stems and thinking about new blooms. 30 seconds later, my entire world had shifted into before and after. Victoria flew in and immediately took charge of the funeral like it was a corporate event. She picked the flowers, approved the programs, curated the guest list with people I'd never seen before, made speeches on behalf of the family while I sat in the front pew feeling like a stranger in a life I used to recognize. Half the people at the service were her friends, her contacts, people who wanted to be seen paying respects. I was too numb and too exhausted to fight her on any of it. I just tried to breathe. 3 days after the burial, while I was sitting in the living room surrounded by unopened sympathy cards, Victoria appeared in the doorway with her arms crossed, Derek hovering behind her like a guilty shadow. She didn't sit. She didn't ask how I was. "I've spoken with the lawyer," she announced. "Everything goes to me. The house, the accounts, everything." My brain stalled. "What lawyer?" I asked. "The lawyer," she said with a lazy wave. "Mom and Dad's estate attorney. He confirmed it." I asked if she had any documents, a copy of the will. Her eye twitched. "I don't need to show you anything. You have 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live." Something cold settled in my stomach. My parents had used the same estate attorney, Harold Whitmore, for over 20 years. If she had actually talked to him, she would have said his name. But she hadn't. She was bluffing, counting on me being too broken and too dependent to question her. That night, after they left, I rolled my chair into my father's study and looked around at the life he'd built. The worn desk, the dent in the leather chair where he always sat, the bookshelf full of binders and gardening magazines and old tax returns. I knew if I walked away now, I wasn't just losing a roof. I was losing the place where I took my first steps, where my mother taught me to cook, where my father taught me how to argue my point without raising my voice. I would be losing the last physical piece of my parents. And somewhere inside, I knew that leaving now, silently, would be the final proof my sister needed to believe I was exactly what she'd always said I was: useless. I opened drawers I'd never opened before, shifting old receipts and faded photographs until I found a business card at the bottom of one file: Harold Whitmore, estate attorney. On the back, in my father's careful handwriting, were 6 words: "Call him, he knows everything." My father almost never wrote notes. If he'd written this one, it meant something. When Victoria stormed back in a few days later, she didn't come with answers, she came with boxes. The front door slammed open, she marched into the living room carrying flattened cardboard, Derek trudging behind her with more, and dropped them at my feet with a hollow thud. "Pack your things," she said. "You have until Friday." I was in the middle of practicing walking short distances without my cane. My therapist had just cleared me to try, and my legs were shaking. "Victoria, I need more time," I started. "I'm still what?" she snapped. "Still pretending to be sick?" I stared at her. "I was in a car accident, you know that." She kicked one of the boxes toward me like it was an animal she was shooing off the porch. "2 years ago. You've milked it long enough." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Honey, maybe we should," he began, but she cut him off. "Derek, stay out of this." Behind them, I heard footsteps. Rose, the nurse who had taken care of my parents in their final months, appeared in the doorway from the kitchen. Beside her stood Maggie, our neighbor of 40 years, clutching a casserole dish. They stopped, took in the scene, and then heard the sentence that changed everything. Victoria stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her expensive, sharp perfume, looked at me the way you look at overflowing trash, and said, "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." The words hung in the air like poison. Rose made a tiny sound, the kind nurses make when they see something that goes against every instinct they have. Maggie's hand flew to her chest. Victoria didn't even glance at them. To her, they were background noise. But I saw Rose do something that would matter later. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and wrote something, quick and discreet, like she was logging a patient's vitals. Maggie moved first. She set the casserole down with a clatter, stepped forward, and said, "Victoria Eileen Thompson." The use of her full name froze even Derek. "Your mother would roll in her grave if she heard you right now." Victoria turned slowly, face rearranging itself into polite confusion. "I'm sorry, who invited you into this conversation?" "I've known this family 40 years, longer than you've been alive," Maggie shot back. "I was family before you learned to walk." She moved to stand beside me, her hand warm and steady on my arm. "Elainer loved both her daughters, but she wasn't blind, Victoria. None of us were." Something flickered across Victoria's face, uncertainty or just annoyance at having her script interrupted. Derek reached for her elbow. "Vic, come on, we can talk about this later." "Don't touch me," she snapped, yanking her arm away. "My mother left me in charge, not her, not some neighbor who thinks she has a right to—" "Your mother didn't leave you in charge of anything," Maggie said quietly but firmly. "Not yet." The room went still. For the first time, I saw genuine fear flash in Victoria's eyes. She looked at me, at Maggie, at Rose with her notebook, and then squared her shoulders. "Fine," she said. "Friday, Sierra. I want you out by Friday." She grabbed Derek's arm, dragged him toward the door, and left. That night, after my hand stopped shaking, I dialed the number on Harold's card. The phone rang twice. A calm, deep voice answered. "Whitmore Law Office." "Mr. Whitmore, this is Sierra Thompson, Robert and Elaine's daughter." There was a pause, then a distinct softening. "Miss Thompson, I've been waiting for your call." Something in his tone made me grip the phone tighter. "You have?" "Your father told me you would reach out. He was quite confident about it." I could hear papers rustling. "I understand your sister has been making claims about the estate. She says everything goes to her. She says you confirmed it." He let out a dry, almost amused breath. "I haven't spoken with Victoria since our parents' anniversary party 3 years ago. She certainly hasn't contacted my office." Relief and anger hit me at the same time, hot and dizzying. "So she's lying?" "I won't characterize your sister's statements," he said carefully. "What I can tell you is that your parents were very specific about their wishes. Very specific, Miss Thompson. I'd like you to come to my office before the official reading. There are aspects of the will that require context, things that no one else knows, not even your sister." He paused. "Your father changed his will 6 months ago, right after Christmas. The Christmas photo, the moment I watched through the kitchen window, he had seen it and he had acted." Between that phone call and the will reading, there were 2 events that stripped the last of my illusions away. The first was the memorial reception at the Italian restaurant where Victoria stood at the head of a long table, glass of wine in hand, giving a performance about honoring our parents' legacy to a room half full of people who barely knew them. I arrived late, my cane tapping against the polished floor, and slipped into the doorway just in time to hear her say, "Mom and Dad worked their whole lives for this family, and I promised to protect everything they built. This house, this community, this name." She said "this family" like she owned it, like it was a brand. Someone finally noticed me standing there. A murmur rippled through the room. Aunt Dorothy, my father's older sister, spoke up from the middle of the table. "Victoria, what about Sierra? Where will she live now?" 40 heads turned. Victoria's smile didn't falter. "Sierra has her own plans," she said smoothly. "She's transitioning." "Transitioning to where?" Dorothy pressed. Victoria shrugged. "Wherever she can manage. She's always been resourceful." A few people laughed, small, awkward, guilty laughs, at my life, at my homelessness. I stood there with my cane, feeling every gaze like a weight, pity from some, judgment from others, and from most the kind of discomfort that makes people look away and pretend they didn't hear what they just heard. As Victoria glided past me toward another group, she leaned in and whispered, "I told you to stay home. You're embarrassing yourself." I wanted to scream. Instead, I remembered what Harold had told me that morning when I met him in his office for the first time. Let her talk. The more she says now, the louder the silence will be later. So I sat down at a small table in the corner, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Maggie arrived 20 minutes later, wearing black and a look that could sour milk. She took in the room, spotted me alone, then followed the line from me to Victoria laughing at the bar. She sat down, asked quietly, "Is it true? Did she really say you're transitioning?" I nodded. Maggie stood up. Before I could grab her hand and stop her, she raised her voice. "Eleanor and Robert would be ashamed if they could see this." The room went dead silent. Victoria turned, glass midway to her lips. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Maggie said. "This girl," she pointed at me, "took care of your parents every single day while you were too busy to visit. She bathed them. She fed them. She held your mother's hand when she was scared. What did you do, Victoria? Send flowers?" Someone gasped. Derek tried to place a calming hand on Victoria's arm. She shook him off and hissed, "You have no right." "I have every right," Maggie said. "Eleanor was Eleanor's best friend for 40 years. I know exactly what kind of daughter you've been." The silence after that felt different, heavy. Watching eyes had shifted focus. And then Maggie leaned down and whispered in my ear, "I talked to Harold this morning. He told me what's coming. Just wait, honey, just wait." 3 days later, I walked into Harold's 12th floor conference room, the kind of space designed to make people feel small, with my cane, my shaking hands, and my entire future on the line. Victoria was already there, seated at the head of the polished table, her Hermes bag placed like a trophy, posture perfect. Derek sat beside her, scrolling his phone with the jittery energy of a man whose life depended on the next notification. I took a seat across from them. Harold entered with a leather briefcase and a court reporter, sat down, and began with simple verification questions before asking Victoria, "Mrs. Hartley, have you ever seen the complete will your parents filed with my office?" She said quickly, "It was in my mother's nightstand, 4 pages, everything left to me as the eldest daughter." Harold removed his glasses, cleaned them calmly, and asked, "Have you ever seen the complete will or just the summary your mother kept as a reference copy?" She froze. "What are you talking about? That was the will." He opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick blue-backed document, and placed it on the table. "This is your parents' last will and testament, 32 pages, executed 6 months ago in this office, witnessed, notarized, and filed with the probate court." "That's impossible," she said. "I saw the will. It was dated 5 years ago." "What you saw was a preliminary draft," Harold said evenly. "They updated their estate plan significantly after that. This," he tapped the thick document, "is the legal version, the only version that matters." When she accused him of fraud and tried to imply I'd forged something, he reminded her he'd been our family's attorney since she was 15 and did not commit crimes to help disabled daughters steal from their parents. Then he began to read. To Victoria, our parents left the investment portfolio, approximately $14 million, but locked in a managed trust. She could withdraw a maximum of $50,000 per year, with the remainder going to her children when they turned 30. Attached was a letter explaining they loved her, but had watched her make poor financial decisions for years, seen money disappear into ventures that never materialized, and did not intend their life's work to be gone within a year of their passing. "The trust," the letter said, "is not a punishment, it is protection." To me, they left the family home and the surrounding property, valued around $4 million, with a clause that it could not be sold for 10 years. "Sierra has been our comfort and companion through our final years," Harold read. "She has tended our garden, held our hands, and given us peace. The house belongs to her. She has earned it." My vision blurred. I heard Victoria make a noise like someone had knocked the wind out of her. Derek's phone slid from his hand and clattered onto the table. But Harold wasn't finished. "There is one more item," he said, pulling out a USB drive. "Your parents recorded a video message to be played at this reading. They were quite insistent." He connected the drive, and seconds later, my living room appeared on the wall screen. My mother in her favorite chair by the window, my father standing behind her with his hand on her shoulder. They looked older than the last time I'd seen them alive, more fragile, but their eyes were clear. "Girls," my mother began, taking a breath, "if you're watching this, it means we're gone, and it means things have unfolded the way we were afraid they might." My father took over. "Victoria, you're our firstborn. We have loved you since the moment you arrived. But love doesn't mean blindness. We've watched how you treat your sister. We've heard the way you talk about her when you think she can't hear." My mother's eyes glistened. "Sierra, you are not useless. You never were. You are our quiet strength. While Victoria chased things that glittered, you stayed. You cared. You showed up. When we changed the will after Christmas, it wasn't because we loved Victoria less. It was because we refused to let our death become another way for you to be erased." My father leaned closer to the camera. "We saw the Christmas photo. We saw who was in the frame and who was standing in the kitchen. We heard the comment about aesthetic. We realized we had been too quiet for too long." My mother reached toward the camera as if she could touch us. "We hope you two can reconcile. We really do. But if you can't, if Victoria continues down this path, at least Sierra will never be thrown out of her own home." The screen went dark. I couldn't see through my tears, but I heard Victoria's chair scrape back and the door open as she walked out without a word. If you've ever had someone in your family finally see your worth, even if it was too late to say it to your face, you already know exactly how that moment felt. I found her in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself, mascara streaked, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Derek stood a few feet away, phone to his ear, whispering urgently into it. When she saw me, something broke. "This isn't fair," she choked. "You don't understand. I have a family to support. I have responsibilities. You have a sister you told to find somewhere else to die," I said quietly. She flinched like I'd hit her. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I said. "You meant every word. You've meant every word for years." She started crying, real messy crying, not the pretty tears she uses at parties. "You don't know what it's like," she said. "Derek's investments collapsed. We owe $400,000. The bank is going to take our house. The kids will lose their school, their friends. And you," she pointed at me like an accusation, "you don't have anyone. You don't have kids. You don't need the money." I let that sit for a second. "You're right," I said. "I don't have kids. I don't have a husband. I don't have any of the things you think make a person valuable. But I also didn't spend years treating my own sister like garbage. I didn't stand in our parents' house 3 days after their funeral and tell you to find somewhere else to die." For a moment, she looked like the little girl I used to share a room with, the one who cried when she had nightmares and crawled into my bed. Then that look vanished under years of entitlement and fear. I could have destroyed her in that hallway, listing every cruel comment, every time she'd ignored me, every time she'd made me feel like my existence was an inconvenience. But that's not who I am, and that's not who my parents raised me to be. So instead, I leaned on my cane and said, "You told me to find somewhere else to die. I found somewhere." I paused. "It's called home." Her breath hitched. "I'm not going to gloat, Victoria," I continued. "That's not who I am. But I am going to set a boundary. You will never speak to me like that again, ever. Not in private, not in public, not in front of your children." I met her eyes. "I am done being your punching bag." She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "I have a proposal," I said. "The trust gives you $50,000 a year. That's not nothing, but it won't fix your immediate mess. I'm willing to loan you what you need to pay off the bank. No interest, reasonable timeline, enough to save your house and keep the kids in school." Her mouth opened. "Why would you—" "But there's one condition," I said, holding up a hand. "You apologize publicly at a family dinner in front of everyone who was at that memorial reception. You tell them what you said to me, and you tell them you were wrong." Silence. Harold had stopped talking on the phone and was staring at me. "And if I don't," she whispered, "then you figure it out alone. Your choice." She looked at Derek, who looked at the floor. Then she straightened her shoulders, picked up her bag, and walked toward the elevator without answering. The doors closed, and I was alone. Harold reappeared a moment later, hand light on my elbow. "Miss Thompson, we still have some paperwork to complete," he said. Back in the conference room, we finished signing the documents that turned their words into reality, the deed to the house, the trust papers, the transfer forms. He told me my parents were proud of me, that my mother had said I was the only thing that made her last months bearable, and then handed me a sealed envelope labeled in my mother's handwriting, "For Sierra, when you're ready." I walked out of that office with the deed to my childhood home, the keys to a trust account, and a letter pressed against my heart that felt heavier than any amount of money. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like the weight of love and responsibility landing on my shoulders all at once. In the months that followed, life didn't magically become perfect. Grief still woke me up some nights like a wave, but my body kept getting stronger. Most days, I didn't need the cane at all. I moved into my parents' bedroom, started physical therapy 3 times a week, and took on part-time consulting work with a local landscape firm. Designing again, seeing a blank yard turn into a living space under my hands, reminded me there was still a future waiting for me beyond pain and drama. My first big personal project was the garden behind the house. I kept my mother's roses, tamed the wild vegetable patch, added curved paths and a small bench where I could sit and talk to them in my head. That little garden became my sanctuary, a place to remember and to breathe. The neighborhood shifted too. People who had laughed or looked away at the reception now crossed the street when they saw me, embarrassed, not sure how to face the girl they'd watched get humiliated and then discovered had been telling the truth all along. Victoria and Derek, meanwhile, sold their Greenwich house for $650,000, paid off their debts, and scraped together enough for a modest 2-bedroom apartment 40 minutes away. Derek lost his job when his investment strategies turned out to be more reckless than genius and ended up working at a regional bank for a fraction of his old salary. Their kids transferred from private to public school. Victoria told anyone who asked it was because the public school has a better arts program. Nobody really believed her. 3 weeks after the reading, she called. "Is your offer still available?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes," I said. "I'm not ready to apologize in front of everyone," she said after a long pause. "I'm not ready to write a check," I answered. The line went dead, but she had called. That was something. 2 months after my parents' deaths, I finally opened my mother's diary. The leather notebook Rose had given me on the porch, saying, "She wanted you to have this. She said you'd know when." I sat in the garden under the stars and read grocery lists, pain notes, little observations about the birds at the feeder, and then, near the back, pages about us. She wrote about Victoria with love and worry, how her eldest chased approval and perfection and might never believe what she had was enough. And she wrote about me in a way I had never heard out loud, that she thought she was taking care of me when I moved home, but realized I had been taking care of them, that my presence, my cooking, my small routines had saved them from a loneliness they didn't know how to name. Her last entry about me said, "If you're reading this, Sierra, know this. You were never useless. You were everything." I closed the diary and cried in a way that felt like releasing something I'd been holding in my chest for years. Not just grief, relief. A few months later, a letter arrived from Victoria. Not a full apology, not a grand gesture, just ink on paper. She wrote that she'd been thinking about what I said in the hallway, about what our parents' video revealed, about who she'd become. She admitted she wasn't ready to apologize in front of everyone and didn't know if she ever would be, but she was trying to understand why she turned into someone who could talk to her own sister that way. And she was sorry, even if the words still felt foreign in her mouth. I read it 3 times, tucked it into my desk drawer next to my mother's diary and my father's business card, and decided that while we might never be close, we could at least stop pretending the other didn't exist. We could coexist at family events someday. We could send birthday cards. We could maybe, slowly, build something different on top of the truth instead of on top of lies. My name is Sierra Thompson. I was told I was useless. I was told to find somewhere else to die. I found home instead, and in the process, I found a version of myself that didn't need my sister's approval, my old job title, or anyone else's idea of what a valuable life looks like. If this story reminded you that boundaries matter more than keeping fake peace, type "boundaries matter" in the comments. And if your own family has ever underestimated you or tried to write you out of your own story, share a piece of that below. This is a faceless, safe corner of the internet for long, emotional story times where people like you and me finally get to be heard.